take a moment to settle in. Make sure that you have need to be comfortable. And if there's anything, whether that's an extra layer, a blanket, a stretch, because how often do we actually ask this of ourselves, right? How often do we settle with just enough instead of the right amount? What is really needed, whether that be rest, solitude, some moral support, a mental health day from work, a bit more carbs. You know, a big part of this conversation is about asking where we settle, where we've got really familiar in tolerating, where we compare what we need to someone else's needs, where we perceive our needs as maybe too needy, or what those needs say about our personhood, our strength, our resilience. And so I'll just give you another minute just to settle in. Maybe get yourself whatever you need. Because the truth is, the more we know, listen, and honor our needs, even in the face of that resistance, even in the face of fear of judgment from another, the more our resilience is built. As I've begun personally truly understanding myself and my needs as a human with ADHD in the last 2 years, I need to move often and a lot. I need to move a lot more than other people. I need a lot more time to do and prepare for certain things. And the comparison I held against me, and particularly my partner, because he's the person I spend the most time with, who is super efficient, processes, clarity kind of guy, we function very differently. And yeah, I held myself to the same requirements that he needed. And it was in learning and owning these about myself, and importantly, the next step, voicing them, making space and arrangements for them, standing up for them without apology when there was pushback, has been a huge part of me breaking these cycles of burnout. Challenging the external expectations that did not suit or fit me. And in doing this over and over again, clunky at times, I have a greater and greater sense of agency and trust in myself. I can feel through my body's cues. Those body's cues that lead to my emotional cues, that lead to chatter and the lens I'm seeing and perceiving through. When I'm under-resourced, I can feel when that's happening. When I'm pushing against myself, when I stop listening and trusting those cues. And I stop listening to the person, myself, being the very person I need to have on my team. Now, before we start to dive in, a few of you have reached out about the Resourced and Resilient Women program. Thank you for that. Excited that you're feeling interested, feeling drawn to it. And as you know, in signing up off the back of this course, you'll get a bonus 75-minute coaching and somatic healing session with me that you can use at any point during the program. There's a super early bird discount and a £100 discount on my spring retreat in March in Canterbury. Now, the Resourced and Resilient Woman course takes a trauma-informed, deeply holistic, nervous system-paced and evidence-based approach. We use heart sensor technology. Every person on the program has a heart sensor that they practice with, they do breath work with. And through the data that comes through from that, we can analyze and follow the flexibility and shifts growing within your nervous system. Super cool. And we're supporting heart-brain coherence throughout this program using the HeartMath method. And this brings greater emotional regulation, stress recovery, greater resource and reserves in our system. It supports burnout recovery and builds resilience at every level. It's a group program that every person on there gets one-to-one support every step of the way, whether that's through our voice notes, whether that's through me keeping in touch around what's coming up through your heart sensor. every step of the way. I get to know everyone really well. And the feedback from the last cohort has been incredible, with attendees starting to change careers off the back of how they're feeling from the program, relationships being strengthened and feeling closer to people, feeling more at home in their body, more trusting in their body, more resilient to the complexity of life, more able to enjoy life, feeling able to ride it and grow from it, and in turn, feel like you're living more honestly, more in line with what's most important to them. So, if you're interested, bring questions to me. You can drop me a note, you can drop me a private message, or we can hop on a call and we can chat further. So today I wanted to speak about the physical heart, this master regulator, great connector, and the role it can play in this big conversation we're having. Particularly today, we're going to be talking directly about burnout, what it is, and what is really needed to support and recover from it. And I also want to deepen the conversation about shadow work today within our relationship to stress. Because actually I had a section of it in the Resource to Resilient Women program, and actually it left everyone wanting to know more. So I've now created a whole module separate, so it has its own shadow work module to it, so that we can go deeper and have more time, because shadow work really is a lifelong practice and one that can support us in every area of our life. And from experience and seeing this in practice and in play in my own life and in my clients' lives, is that shadow work's one of those things that it shines a light. We integrate these parts of ourselves that we've perhaps shamed, rejected. And then when we step into a new chapter of our lives, when we take that kind of next step of evolution, of growth, then shadow work comes to the fore, because every time we step into that freer, more freely expressed version of ourselves, more resourced and rooted version of ourselves, then the shadow shows up in new ways and it requires new integration. So it's really a beautiful complement to this work, and really is a complement to us living in more sovereignty. But to really arrive, I want to start with a simple heart coherence practice before we dive into all these beautiful subjects. So I invite you to get your feet grounded, and you can do this with eyes open or closed. If you keep your eyes open, then I really invite you to just cast your eyes away from the screen. You don't need to see me for this. Find something to soften your gaze down towards. And do you know what, at this stage, have a wiggle, have a stretch, maybe have a bit of a yawn. Oh. And then once you've had a good old stretch and given your body a little bit of what it needs, we're going to take a hand onto the heart, but take your time to get your hand there so you can really feel it land, feel the shape of the hand, and maybe even tune into what you want to communicate through this touch, being for a moment the giver of this touch. For these next few minutes, we're going to be moving through a heart coherence practice, and I'll explain more about what that is after we've experienced it. So offering the breath to rise up to the hand now. And for these next 3 breaths, breathing in, filling up right to the top, almost like you're filling up like a fresh glass of water. And as you breathe out, blow or shh that exhale out of the mouth. And 2 more just like this, filling up right to the top, finding a comfortable pause at the top. Taking a pause. And then really gradually letting it go, letting it go. And once more in your own pace, in your own time. And allowing that exhale to really help you land, soften into the chair, let the soles of the feet soften and spread into the floor. And then over these next few rounds of breath, beginning to count the length of your inhale and your exhale. And over these next few rounds, begin to bring your inhale and exhale into balance length. So you might need to lengthen one half, drop one half, and then find a balanced breath that works for you, one that you can maintain for these next few minutes. I'm finding a cyclical breath. And by that, I mean no pause between the inhale and the exhale, no pause between the top and the bottom of the breath, almost like it's moving in and out with the tide. And once you've found that balanced breath, beginning to sense your breath traveling directly in and out of this space, the center of the chest, the breath traveling directly into the heart and out of the heart. So much so, you might even imagine the breeze of the breath traveling underneath the hand in, and the breeze of the breath traveling out of the heart under the hand. And so for these next few rounds of breath, just find that focus. This breath directly in, and this breath directly out. And just noticing with curiosity how these balanced breaths in and out of the heart, if there's any ease, any jumpiness, the quality of this breath moving in and out, not to fix it, but just to notice. And for those visual among us, maybe you imagine the breath traveling directly into the physical heart, if that image is helpful to you. Or perhaps for those more energetically inclined, just sensing a light filling this central space. As that breath fills that central space, perhaps it softens at its edges. And as it exhales, there is a landing. And so taking a few more breaths, however this supports you. But keeping that attention directly in and out of the heart and the breath balanced. And now I invite you to bring to mind a recent moment over the last few weeks, 2 weeks. A moment that brought some connection, a little bit of light to your day. A moment of pleasure or beauty, ease. And allowing whatever comes to the forefront to be the thing that you work with today. As you continue to breathe in and out of the heart, bringing this memory forward. And every breath is almost as if we're turning up the dial of the vibrancy of that memory. The details are a little bit crisper, a little brighter. The textures, the colors, maybe the sounds around you in that moment, in that experience. As you continue to turn up the dial with every balanced breath, beginning to bring forward also the emotions that were present, the essence of that experience. How did that moment of pleasure or ease or connection, what emotions did it bring up? And begin to call it forward into your experience right now. As you continue to connect to this memory, stay true with this balanced breath, bringing forward that little more, the essence of that experience into the body right now. And what about that experience was significant for you, was supportive for you? In that moment, what did it remind you? What did it remind you of? Of how the world works, or your place within it, or the resource and support around you, whatever it is, what made that experience particularly meaningful? And let's take a few more balanced breaths in and out of the heart, connecting and bringing forward the essence of that experience into the now. And in a moment, we're going to begin to land from this practice. But before we do, just really gently letting the hand rest back down into the lap. Notice how you're doing, how you're feeling as you bring your attention back into the body as it is now. And what's the aftermath of that short practice? What has it left behind? Are there any parts of the body that you're particularly drawn to here? Are there any emotions or chatter present? Is there anything that's part of your experience now that perhaps you weren't aware of before we began? And then if the eyes are closed, beginning to gently open them. Take some time now to look about your space, making sure that you're turning the head and the eyes as you do so. Maybe taking some time to look behind you, the tops and the bottom corners of the space that you're in. And perhaps even naming, acknowledging a color or some textures, maybe a picture on the wall. Just reorienting our nervous system back in space, in a safe space. So, maybe taking pen to paper here. I wanted to start with this practice because it's such a foundational piece of practice that can support us at any time. And what I love is the simplicity of it and how I use the basis of this practice a lot, and we can change it, we can adapt it depending on what's arising for us, what we need. And so today we brought that emotionally resourcing experience to the forefront. So it felt fresh enough to bring into the body a recent emotionally resourcing experience. Now, an important element of recovery and rewriting is reminding our nervous system and brain of the glimmers of resource that are all around us to draw upon. We have a negative bias as animals who need to survive in the wild. So it's through practices like these and alongside actively looking for those little resourcing moments throughout our days are really key. It's a moment of ease, the touch of the wind on our face, a good hug, a ray of sunlight coming through the window, a delicious, nourishing breakfast. These moments, if we connect to them, these accumulate. And the beautiful thing is, the more we actively acknowledge them, engage with them, and it can be a flicker of a moment that we do that. Noticing that resourcing moment and noticing that our body's response to that. The more we start seeing them and engaging with them, the more we can be resourced by them. We spoke yesterday about the small but mighty choices we make without overwhelming our system, that add up and begin to re-expand that window of tolerance, begin to re-expand our capacity to be able to ride and welcome in more of life, both the challenging and the ease. Challenge and ease can coexist. Survival and a sense of safe enough can coexist. As I said, we can't get rid of stress and we can't control it all, unfortunately. So learning to hold this duality of our experience is so important, because when we're depleted, when we're burnt out, when we're running chronically in survival mode, it's really hard to see and feel anything but the challenge and the discomfort. And so, of course, we want to distract from that. Of course, we want to shut that down as fast as possible. What these really gentle but important and powerful practices also do is remind us of the things that bring uniquely us joy, connection, pleasure. I could tell you 20 billion different practices we could do to support our nervous system and bring regulation and all this stuff into the world. But if we're not actually gathering that information for ourselves and going, wow, it's this space in nature that really works for me, or it's having that moment in bed on my own before I get up with the kids, just to have a stretch and be against those soft sheets, whatever it is, that gives us a moment to be on our terms, that brings us a sense of just being and resourcing with what's around us. Now, what we also began here with this practice was bringing our nervous system, body, heart, and brain into coherence. Now, coherence, in short, is the sweet spot between rest and digest and fight and flight. I like to think of it as awake, present, and grounded. Now, practicing getting into and maintaining this coherent state helps to clear any allostatic mode, and that's the accumulative depletion that our body builds up as it goes through constantly trying to bring our system back into balance during and after the stress response. And it's that rebalancing process that it's constantly going through, especially if we're going through periods of chronic stress. It's going through this allostasis process over and over again and never really getting us into recovery state. And if it does, it's not for long enough. And allostasis takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of our reserves, which is why if we're not then going into recovery to build our reserves back up, this is where we start to lose our reserves real quick. So it's this coherent state that when we relearn familiarity of it, and the more we do it, the more we call upon it whenever we need it, the more we are gently building back up our reserves. Now, your physical heart is your master regulator. It's a master regulator. It's a second brain because it has its own nervous system, which means it's able to store, process, learn, and remember information. It sends more messages to the head brain than the head brain does to the heart brain, meaning that this brain is not the sole conductor of our body as much understanding of how the body works, all the research was pointing towards for a long, long time. And heart coherence is where your heart rate variability sets off a ripple effect. So when it gets into this balanced heart rate variability, it sets off a ripple effect so that your body, emotions, and mind are working in harmony, or your physiological systems start to work in harmony. That in itself is bringing a greater sense of ease, resource, and certainly not depletion when we're in that state. Through simple breath and visualization, you can bring your heart rate to this rhythm. This state of coherence has a longer unfolding effect too. Because when it sets off this physiological, this ripple effect, it can have a profound impact on our ability to focus, but also our emotional regulation. A big thing and challenge when we're going through periods of stress, and particularly when we're landing in, or we are already in burnout. This state of coherence means that our emotions are in line with your heart and your values and what's most important to you. When your mind is awake and clear, you feel able to connect with others without controlling or overcompensating, because we're not running out from survival mode. When your bodily systems are functioning well and in harmony with each other, the way we then move through the world is different. The way we see ourselves is different. The way we sit comfortably and inhabit our bodies is different. The actions that we take will be motivated from a different space. We're moving from a place of integrity as opposed to fear, risk, and threat. We're moving from a place of safety and connection as opposed to fear, risk, and threat. And it's here where we start to see over time our inner world and our outer world coming into coherence too. Because we have the resource and the reserves to make courageous decisions. To, like one of my clients has, she's starting to make the move in her career that she didn't feel she was able to do before she started doing this work. The risk felt too big, the fear felt too big. And now, through this work, through this accumulation of coherence practice and everything that we've done around that as well, through this really empowered stress healing and recovery method, she feels able to make the big shifts and changes in her life now so that her outer life is going to be in reflection and in coherence with her inner life, her inner wants, her inner needs. Now, going into full states of rest and digest is vital and important for deep restoration, healing, and rebalancing. There is no argument about that at all. But we can't be walking around in this state all the time because we never get anything done. And as we said yesterday, it's walking around in rest and digest all the time isn't going to bring greatest adaptability and flexibility and resilience into our nervous system. We need to be moving in between these states and have those energizing, activating experiences in our bodies too. Further to this, if we've already begun falling into burnout and depression, which work hand in hand often, we are already in a depleted, tired version of rest and digest. We're already down here. So we're wanting to gently introduce life force, awakeness, dynamism back into our system without overwhelming it. So more lying down on the floor isn't going to do that, nor are we going to feel up for suddenly going and running a marathon or going and being really, really active. This state of coherence is where it can gently start bringing resource back into our nervous system, flexibility and resilience back into our nervous system in our body without overwhelming it, without potentially overwhelming and then depleting us more. That crash and burn. And from personal experience and seeing this with clients, so often when particularly we've been stuck in recurring cycles of burnout for a long time, or we've been stuck in a burnout that we can't really shake, we can't move forward from. But when we do start to get those flickers of energy again, flickers of motivation, flickers of being able to get out of bed, then we get too excited and we try and do everything all of a sudden because we're like, yeah, I can do all this stuff again. And then, we don't have that resource and that reserves and that resilience yet. So coherence is such an important state to bring ourselves into time and time again. Burnout requires us to garner resource from this coherent state, this place where we can get grounding and energy at the same time, and are more open to being resourced by those glimmers that I spoke about earlier, those glimmers of life, of nature, of being human, of getting some pleasure through our senses. We do a lot of work around engaging our senses within the Resourced and Resilient Woman because our senses are direct messengers to our nervous system where we can feed in information through all of them. Information that signals connection, signals safety, brings us into presence, enables us to widen our periphery again. Now, another beautiful thing about the physical heart is it releases oxytocin, this love and connection hormone that for many years we thought that only the brain could do this, right? So when up here is really busy, we can also come here to bring that sense of connection and being in relationship to the world around us again. Something we spoke about a lot in day one. And all of that begins to come back online. So I wanted to talk to you specifically about burnout today because it deserves its own conversation. And it's something that is rampant in our society and yet is widely misunderstood. And that means that a lot of people are finding it hard to fully recover from it. Now, the basic description of burnout is exhaustion that doesn't go away with rest. And within this description, it has three key elements. Cynicism, that sense of, oh, is this it? Disassociation and disengagement. But I feel this is very narrow. From experience, burnout is often fueled by shame within that, when we confuse purpose with a misaligned sense of duty. There is fear involved in burnout, when we are pushing to continue and give so much away to a way of life that isn't aligned with who we are and what we really want and need. When we're giving so much away to life and we're not getting that back. We're not getting back what we put in. So there can be resentment. And also because we're falling into this depleted state of stress, we start to move into that disconnection. So we start to other from people, we start to isolate. And when we're not getting back what we put into this way of life, whether that be support, fulfillment, satisfaction, and we're running headfirst towards something that isn't actually as important to us as we had been led to believe. This is why so many high-flying, highly successful, hard-working people who reach the top and then they feel lost, they feel stuck, they feel empty. It's that sense of, is this it? They were chasing the thing that they were told they should want. But your body holds the score. And often the process of pushing through, keep pushing towards this thing, means that we've had to hold our body and our experience, our embodied experience, at arm's length. In order to push and get through that, we've needed to repress those uncomfortable feelings of, oh, this doesn't feel right. But I can't possibly turn back now because that would be changing my mind. And what would that mean about me? I can't possibly change this now because that would be failing. That would be wasting a lot of time or energy. There's so much fear around it, like we get trapped in this. And our body was often throwing us all the signs at a really early stage in that process. And we had to push away, not listen, not trust it. And pushing away ourselves and our experience is in itself depleting and tiring. And it can really push us away from having a really loving, compassionate, respectful sense of self. When we're being stretched to reach the external shoulds, those external expectations that have told us how we should be, what our lives should look like, the ideals of how our situation should be, should look like, how it should be approved of by others. When we're hanging out here and we're trying to reach that should expectation, and yet the reality of our experience isn't giving us that feedback. Burnout is inner conflict, that brake pedal and accelerator on constantly in body, emotions, and mind until we run out of fuel. And it's a really, really masterful way of intercepting it often. It's our body going, you have not been listening to me. It's time to pause. But because of all of these shoulds and conditioning and pressures and expectations that we have, that's been instilled in us, and then we hold ourselves, up to these expectations that aren't ours, that we didn't set, then we continue to just when we do recover, land right back where we started again, in the same cycles, chasing the same things. That our body's going, no. Now, I'm not saying that we all just quit our jobs if we don't like them and live in the forest, although I have to say sometimes this does sound quite appealing. But if burnout and stress are your story consistently right now, it's time to look at the many aspects of your life with radical honesty and curiosity. Where are you losing your life force faster than you can top it up? Why can't you top it up? And what are the expectations you're placing on yourself and how things should be that are neither realistic or kind? Because the chances are you didn't originally set those expectations that you're trying to hold yourself up against. They're coming from societal, familial, intergenerational narratives. Enter shadow work. We'll talk about that in a bit. Now, where in your life are you giving space for yourself to be soft? Do you have safe spaces and people in your life to be vulnerable and not have to have it all together, not have to be successful, not have to be getting it all right? Do you have those safe spaces where you can be human and imperfect and not have all the answers, to be a work in progress? Recovering from burnout or depletion or chronic stress, like all of this, has to be gradual. We have to use what resource you do have right now masterfully and discover the things that top it up in a way that doesn't overwhelm your system. I have a client of mine who's going through this process at the moment and has been in our work starting to gather those small but mighty things in her life that top up her cup. And a lot of these things that bring gentle pleasure and connection through her senses. A walk in the park right near her house, where she can hear the birds. Stretching in bed before she wakes up, before she gets up. Talking to her friends, enjoying her favorite tea, the smell of her favorite candle, and not just trying to do all these things like a tick list, like, yeah, done all my resourceful things today, but choosing one and really being with it when she does. And this takes a lot of trust. and it takes a lot of patience. But it's these things that begin to instill safety in a different pace, begin to instill safety in giving ourselves these resources. Like I said at the start, how often do we just settle? How often do we just go, yeah, I'm just going to speed through this? Now, our senses are powerful connectors to the world around and within us. They are first and foremost primal survival mechanisms. So we don't eat gone off food, right? Where we can understand if we are in a safe place to sleep for the night. So they can instill safety through our senses. But also the beauty of our senses is that they are also designed for pleasure. We are wired for pleasure because pleasure is resourcing, pleasure is regulating, pleasure brings us back into that state of grounded and awake in the room, connected in our bodies. To instill the embodied message that I'm safe, I am here, I'm listening, I'm engaging. Now, there are many different frameworks to explain the stages of burnout, but I wanted to share one of those with you. And knowing the conversations that I've been having with those who have signed up for this, really tuning into if any of these stages resonate, I can pretty confidently say that all of us will be familiar with probably about 3 of these at some point in our life, at some periods of time that we've been navigating. And whilst the 12 stages that I'm going to share, I'm going to be using examples of work, but actually these 12 stages and experiences of burnout and lead up to burnout ring true in life across the board, whether that's when we're studying, when we're traveling, moving house, parenting, training for something, whether we're trying to be the healthiest, the fittest, the most perfect version of ourselves, and it starts to go a little bit toxic and we don't realize. The first stage is a compulsion to prove oneself. And this can start to take shape as working long hours, taking on more responsibility than we can handle, starting to neglect self-care. This is both a stress response. It can be a trauma response in order for us to feel safe and in control and to feel wanted, needed, indisposable. And it also falls into the fawn response that I haven't spoken about that much, and we don't really have time to dive into it hugely, but fawning is where we really push our own needs away to be liked, to be wanted, to be needed. It comes from a survival response of not being rejected by the pack, right? And so this can look like people pleasing, unhealthy boundaries, not being able to say no, certainly just saying yes to everything and anything. And it kind of it's a compulsion almost. And this is where the fawning response can really come into its own. And then the next stage is when we start working harder, right? And it's here that we start to work harder, we work longer hours, we're trying to overcompensate for feelings of inadequacy. And because we're taking on more than we have capacity for, we are often feeling inadequate. This is a point where we can often feel like we're holding it all alone. We can't possibly ask for help because what might that mean about us? We can't possibly tell someone that we need some help or that we've taken too much on because what that might mean about us. Hyper independence and opening up to connection here again is a key part. I know I've been hammering home this connection piece, but it's so important that we can find connection again and we can draw upon it when we see ourselves going into these patterns. And the next stage is when we start to neglect our needs. So we might start to neglect our physical, our emotional needs. maybe not eating as well, not getting enough sleep, not moving our bodies in the way, like all of our routines start to fall away because the thing that we're holding feels too much and we don't have much space for ourselves. And when we do offer ourselves that self-care, it's really a sense of trying to fix ourselves and quick. Then the next stage is displacement of conflict. So at this stage, we might find that we are coming up into either conflict with other people, or we feel like our emotions, we're starting to really project them onto other people. You're the reason I'm feeling this way, right? And this is where our walls begin to go up. We start othering those around us. Again, at the very time we need to feel that community around us. So if you take nothing from these 2 days, maybe you explore who is your support network, the quality of that right now, and starting to drop into how comfortable you are in receiving support from them when you need it. How comfortable you are to put your hands up and go, I need some help. I've taken on too much. And looking at how we can start to build an embodied resilience and belief to have those hard conversations. Now, this next stage it's called the revision of values, and this is where we start to revise what's important to us to justify the way that we're behaving. And the next stage is where we start to really deny the emerging of problems. So we might start to deny or become defensive around the way that we're behaving. If we're confronted with feedback, we take that as, our personhood, our identity is being put into question. So it's really us starting to move from this place of fight or flight. And then as we move into the next stage is where we withdraw. We might withdraw from more social situations. We stop prioritizing social connection and situations. We start to isolate ourselves. And this is where we're starting to flee, withdraw, and even start to move into freeze response. Just pulling away. That connection can feel too much anyway. That I don't have time for that anyway. That I'm too tired for that anyway. And the next stage is point obvious behavioral changes, but obviously we can see from these other stages that the behavior just slowly becomes more and more amplified. And this is where we start to potentially start finding our emotional dysregulation coming into play. So starting to feel much more negative, cynical, irritable, angry, and of course, our lens narrows. That sense of connection is being pushed further apart, further away from us. And we start to feel like everything is a battle, is something to be pushed through. And anyone who's getting in our way, well, they're not on our team. And the next few stages comes into feeling disconnected from the things that we were throwing all our energy into. So let's say this is our work. We threw everything in the kitchen sink and our sense of identity into this work. And then we start to view ourselves as really just another object in that. We're just an enabler of the work getting done. So we start to feel like we're almost dehumanizing ourselves in order to get shit done, to keep on going at the pace that feels unmaintainable. And we have to do all of these things in order for that to, one, make sense, and two, feel like the right thing to do. And often it's here that we're pushing our sense of self so far away that our sense of identity falls away anyway. So we're like, well, I might as well throw my all into this. And this is where then we move into the stages of just not getting satisfaction from the things we used to, feeling numb, losing a sense of meaning of things. And this is really where we drop into freeze. And when we really drop into those stages of burnout, things are starting to shut down. We start to feel like we're struggling to find meaning in our work, meaning in the things that used to bring us joy, that used to bring us pleasure. We're meaning making creatures, so this stage can be really unsettling. And gathering inner resource through heart coherence practices, just like we did today, can really gently bring that part of us back online little by little. And I'm saying this little by little because if we just went into a practice and we're like, I feel connected, I feel expansive, when really we're, ready to crash flat on our face, that's just going to feel like a positive lie. This is why affirmations need to be embodied, one, have our nervous system supporting it, and it feeling like a felt sense. And so when we're at this stage, bringing meaning back in, just really gently, noticing those flickers of, oh, do you know what? My feet feel really relaxed, or that that breakfast felt it was really delicious, and I'm really chuffed that it had a few extra tomatoes in it. Whatever it was, that just starts to bring that sense of agency and meaning back in. Because I say, if we start to lose that sense of meaning, this is where it can start to feel like our burnout and the state that we're in and the circumstances that we're in are happening to us. They're now bigger than us. And often around this stage, we can often start to get symptoms of depression because it's the same response in our nervous system. We've gone so full throttle and now our adrenals are packing in. And so our emotional regulation, our serotonin creation, our serotonin transferring into melatonin, our sleepy hormone starts to be inhibited. And so we start to feel sad, we start to feel stuck. And that in itself brings its own layer and version of tiredness into the mix. And then that final stage is the burnout itself, whether I don't really see it as this end goal. And it's just this sense of feeling both exhausted and stressed, that accelerator pedal and the brake on. And the thing that unsettles me about these stages, this list that I went through, is how much of this is instilled almost right away when we enter the education system. So you might have seen I had a conversation with one of my friends the other day who's a psychotherapist and specializes in this stuff too, Elaine, and she was like, this conditioning and need to prove ourselves is absolutely, drilled into the way in which we are educated. We start having to take home homework from the time we're 6, 7, signaling to us that it's totally normal to be taking work home after we finish. It's these things that our personal space where we think we sign off when we come home isn't the case. To prove ourselves, to fit in, to need to be validated in order to know that we've done right, in order to feel fulfilled and pleased with our work. Now, I'm not saying that praise and appreciation aren't important and aren't incredibly motivated, whether we're kids or whether we're adults. Of course they are. But if we have been conditioned to rely on that, to inform our worth as a whole person, this is where it gets tricky. And this is where so many of us don't see ourselves moving into burnout, moving towards burnout, because a lot of these early stages are totally normal and we've probably been running in them for quite a long time. And so there is such a multi-layered holistic approach needed here because our body, heart, head and sense of self become so entangled in all of this. So much so we can begin to identify with burnout. We can identify as being that person who burns out every few months or whatever, and it becomes a part of who we are. I know personally, with going through years of recurring burnout, that actually my burnout was my way of coping and actually getting myself out of situations, not consciously, but I would run as fast as I could, head first through all this stuff, going through all these stages. And it was the burnout that was the interceptor because I didn't feel safe enough to voice my needs earlier, to listen to my body earlier, to ask for help, to question the pace. Because certainly I was being egged on in some of the working spaces that I was doing previously. Yeah, work harder. Yeah, give us more. Yeah, stay late. Well done, well done. You're doing such a great job. And so I just thought that was a very natural way of my body going, okay, I need to have some rest now. And it was becoming normal for me. Now, the more we can put ourselves into states of regulation, coherence, balance, restoration, and this often starts with those flickers of time where we can just land there in that little bit of balance, your nervous system will be relearning. Your nervous system will be finding familiarity in reading its inner and outer world from this lens of safety. You'll be able to meet unfamiliarity, change, and even discomfort from a place of greater steadiness, knowing that you have the capacity to be in that discomfort, but also feel grounded and awake. We rebuild that sense of collective community around us again. Burnout recovery is brave work. It's really soulful self-discovery work. But my goodness, it's rich and important. And where we land on the other side of it is a wiser, more powerful, clearer, and more resilient you. Because recovering from burnout is really rewriting on every level. And this is why in the Resourced and Resilient Woman, we use one simple tool daily that brings us into coherence, in particular that heart coherence. And then we gently begin to layer others on top, other little motifs onto that practice. And over the 8 weeks, exploring tools that bring us into states of embodied, honest personal inquiry with those practices, of clarity, of finding safety in rest, of exploring our relationship to rest, regulation, starting to embody more confidence, more connection, more honesty, actually. So much of this is about learning to live more honestly. Another really important and important thing that I wanted to say about coherence here is, just like I mentioned yesterday, states of relaxation for someone who has experienced trauma and that trauma has not been resolved or healed or integrated in their system. And for people who are living in chronic states of stress, often those two circumstances can be running alongside, can be part of the same response. Being relaxed is not relaxing. Being calm is not relaxing, because being still, pausing when we've been running a million miles an hour is not a state of familiarity for us. And so these more active states that keep us awake, that keep us in the room, we can have our eyes open, we can be engaging with life and space around us. We're not going to these deep rest and digest states, which can sometimes, especially if we find ourselves moving into freeze, as a trauma response, as a coping stress response. And freeze can feel scary because it can feel like we're going to get stuck there. It can feel like we're numb, like we're withdrawing, like we're disassociating. And because freeze is connected to our rest and digest response, why would we want to go there if that's a really scary place to be? So these coherent states can offer us a way in to slow down, to be in our body, to pause, to listen without going into these states of deep rest that might not feel safe for us yet. And so these coherence practices can be a really important pathway to us finding really carefully and gently safety in those deeper states of rest and relaxation over time. So I want to dive into shadow work real quick and then close in a practice. So, and I struggle so much in these mini courses because I just want to give you everything. But just to say, with the shadow work, this is combined with belief work and inner child work as well. And this is lifelong work. You know, shadow work includes inner child work because a huge amount of our core beliefs are built between the ages of 0 and 2. And then they are reinforced between the ages of 7 to 14. And then we live a life that compounds and reinforces those beliefs and behaviors as well. So often, when we get triggered by that belief, by that fear, by that way in which we understand our place and how the world works, the response in our body will be similar, if not the same, as those seed experiences that first taught us that belief in the first place. So using the example of, say you're 4 years old and you're at school and the teacher embarrasses you and then everyone laughs and you're so embarrassed. And I don't know if you remember those first experiences of embarrassment. They're big and they're full bodied. And, when you look back at it right now and you're like, well, I'm a 37-year-old woman and I know that that wasn't a big deal and that was a long time ago, no big thing. And then say 2 days later, we go into work and our boss says something, maybe it's a bit passive aggressive or whatever, but there is something about that situation that set off our subconscious and our alarm bells and our somatic subconscious of our nervous system to say, oh, this feels the same. And so it raids that filing cabinet and brings the same embodied response back into our body. It will be the same embodied response unless we start to, if it's unchecked, if we haven't started to do work on this, right? And so we have to respect that so much of the moments when we are triggered, we are acting from our child self. We are acting from and working with and experiencing our most vulnerable part of ourselves. It's drawing experience from our most formative years. When we were mega vulnerable, when we were so reliant on other people. And so this work has to include inner child work. And this work has to include a really deep respect and compassion for ourselves as we start to move through shadow work and belief work. Now, Carl Jung coined the shadow, the parts of us and the parts of being human that we were taught were unlovable, unacceptable, shameful. He also uses archetypes to help us see what aspects of different human personalities and behaviors we're repressing, shaming, or don't think are viable to us. We all have a shadow, and that will be informing our relationship to ourselves and how we embrace, care for, meet, and respect ourselves. This will impact our sense of boundaries, our understanding of our boundaries, and whether or not we feel safe or worthy to uphold them. the expectations we place upon ourselves, the way we perceive ourselves full stop, the way we perceive ourselves under stress. You know, when we perceive ourselves being under stress, whether we see it as being a badge of honor, the proof that we're worthy, the proof that we're hardworking, the proof that we're reliable, the proof that we're committed, the proof that we're disciplined. And if we're not feeling that, what does that mean about us? Does it mean that I'm lazy? Does that mean that I could lose it all? Does that mean that I'm going to be rejected, that I'm not going to be taken seriously? It's important to start meeting these aspects of us, integrating and accepting them and rewriting them. Now, a few little tips just to give you an idea of when you're functioning from your shadow. You're functioning from your shadow when you are judging someone. When you're judging someone, that judgment that you're placing on them is that judgment is the part of you that you aren't willing to accept that's been put into your shadow, that's shamed. So when you're judging someone, you're othering them and you're saying, I would never do that. That is something that they would do that I wouldn't do. And so part of this shadow work is about saying, well, actually, you know, if the conditions were set in a certain way, actually, I could have the potential to do that. It doesn't mean that I'm going to go out and do it now, but actually, that part of me exists. So we're functioning from our shadow if we're judging someone or something. When we're feeling shame or embarrassment, because that's our shadow going, oh no, I've been seen. Or, oh God, I hope they don't see this part of me. When we feel envious, when we feel jealous, we're acting on our shadow. When you feel afraid or panicked that something might make you unlovable, undesirable, rejected. When we fear that people might find certain things out about us. We act from our shadows when we lie. Because we don't want people to see the truth. Anytime you're triggered in your daily life, there's a shadow there. So starting to know your triggers, gathering and starting to know your triggers is a really important part of this work. Those moments that throw you into activation, whether it's a 10 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10, like, oh, that rallied me up, or that kind of pissed me off a little bit, or actually I've gone into full-blown stress response here and I'm panicking and fighting my way out of the situation. What are those triggers for you? Get to know them. It's so important, not just because you can start to offer yourself support, additional support, maybe additional tools, preparation tools, if you know that you're coming up against these triggers thick and fast and often. But also getting to know your triggers, because that will start to really help you identify the parts of yourself that you haven't been willing to accept yet. And we need to start bringing those parts that have been shamed in you into the light. The thing about shame is that it loves residing in the shadows. The thing about shadow work is that we are really gently bringing those things into the light. Whether that's first through personal inquiry, working with a coach or a therapist that you trust, journaling, writing about them, starting to bring this stuff out of the shadowy subconscious where it loves to hang out and really take the steering wheel often without us realizing, and into a place where we have more awareness and we have more choice. So there's a few things that we can do. Now, as I said, I have a whole module and process to this. So I'm just going to give you a whistle-stop tour right now. We have to move through personal inquiry, journaling, finding those safe spaces, noticing how our shadow is playing out through our embodied experience, through our emotional landscape, as well as the thought patterns too. But as I said before, the body holds the score, it's the root of the river. So often we can start to feel the shadow arising pretty early, the more we attune to our system. Start to learn your triggers. And what's the narratives and behavior chains that follow those triggers? Treat yourself as the child or most vulnerable part of you that you are functioning from in that moment. Offer the part of yourself that is feeling that full-bodied fear, embarrassment, shame, whatever it might be. Offer them the patience, the compassion, the curiosity, and the safety, the acceptance, the kindness that you probably weren't shown in that very root experience that then created your shadow in the first place. Meet yourself with the very qualities and things that you weren't met with first time round. Now, when we're in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, this will cloud the lens. This will cloud the lens. This will say, I'm not moving from my shadow right now. I'm moving from great clarity. I'm going to fight, flight, or fawn my way out of this, right? So it's time to bring it back online, this sense of safety and connection and heart connection stack. So we can start to hold ourselves with enough safety and steadiness to also hold the discomfort of our shadow arising. And the last thing is when we start to feel that shadow being triggered, once we've started to settle ourselves down, listen to it, let it be heard, so it doesn't keep on shouting at us, right? What's the next available action I can take right now? What's the next available posture or belief or gesture I can offer myself, meet myself with right now that feels honest? So when you feel mega triggered, maybe your shadow has brought up something. I'm not telling you to suddenly meet yourself with a belief of toxic positivity, of I feel great and everything is tickety boo and it feels like a positive lie. What's the next thing that feels most available to me right now, that feels honest, that I can move to, that will support me, that might bring me into a little more coherence, a little bit more into the present, a little bit more into my body? So that might be bringing a belief to the forefront. Right now, I'm safe enough. And that might be accompanied by a shift in posture, a hand on their head or the belly, or something that will offer just a little bit of that grounding and connection. So, what's the next available step that you can meet yourself with that might bring enough support and safety? Now, I don't have time to explore emotional self-care today like I wanted, but I feel that there's so much for you to begin diving into here. And I wanted to close with two practices. And the first one you can do from seated, and the second one, you'll need your yoga mat rolled out or a space you can lay down on your front. Obviously, this isn't appropriate if you're pregnant. Um, And so if you are, stay seated for that breathing practice to come. And if you are going to come down on your mat and lay on your front after this EFT practice, have a blanket folded up or a relatively thin pillow. You're going to come and lay down on that in a moment after this first practice. And that blanket is going to fill the space of your abdomen from your ribs to your hips. All will be revealed in a moment. I just wanted to share a quick EFT practice that I actually shared in another circle today that I thought just speaks to those gathering of resources that we were talking about earlier. So for those of you who have never done EFT before, That's totally cool. Well, I'm just going to show you the points really quickly that we'll be tapping to. If you forget a point, that's fine. I will let you know as we're moving on to the next point. If a point doesn't feel comfortable or it doesn't feel accessible due to mobility or an injury or whatever, just miss that point out. It's absolutely fine. So we're going to start with the karate chop point. We'll be using the tips of our fingers, and it can be a really light tap. And then we'll go to the crown of the head, the inner eyebrow, the top of the eyebrow, the side of the eye, under the eye, under the nose, on the chin, on the collarbone, the side of the body, and across the wrist. You can do this with your whole piece fingers. Okay. So you can do this with your eyes open or closed. And begin to just gently draw down your breath. Slow it down, and let's start with that karate chop point. And I'm holding my hand up so you can see my hand, but you can let yours rest down. And begin to welcome in that slower breath. And maybe a longer exhale here, so blowing or pushing that exhale out of the mouth. And just for a moment as we tap here, just noticing how you're doing, how you're feeling after all this information. Are there any questions arising? Are there anything that you want to learn more about, dive into? Is there some stuff that you want to take away and reflect? There's some actions that you want to go ahead and take pretty quickly. Just taking a moment to notice what's here, how your body has been receiving and is processing all this information. Are there any sensations arising? Any parts of your body that your attention's being drawn to? And where is that? Do those sensations have a texture or a color to them? A movement or a temperature? Just noticing. Now, this really short routine here is just instilling that motivation to start looking up and around for the resource that's all around us. Amongst the chaos, amongst the complexity of life, amongst the conflict, amongst the curveballs. As we continue to tap on the side of the hand, repeating after me and saying it out loud if you can. But you can silently repeat it if you don't feel safe or right to do it right now in the space that you're in. Right now, I am reminding myself to see the glimmers of light all around me. Even though I sometimes miss them, because I'm too busy, too stressed, too distracted. Even though I find it hard to see them sometimes. Even though I sometimes choose not to see them. Right now, I am opening up to the possibility of these little flickers of support supporting me. And if the eyes are closed here, just taking the eyes open again and take a look around your space. Feel the body against the support underneath you. Is there a color, a texture in the space that you're in that's pleasing, pleasurable? Maybe it reminds you of something. And sense the body against the chair. That support. Are there any parts of your body that feel comfortable, easeful, relaxed, comfy? And then choose one thing to rest your attention on for a moment, whether that's in your space or in your physical experience. And notice how it feels to tune into that little point of resource, how it lands in your body, in your breath, in your mood. Take a big breath with me. And we're going to start to move around the other points that start at the crown of the head. There are flickers of resource and support all around me. Into the inner eyebrow. I have connected to, and here put the glimmer that you just identified, that little point of resource, on the top of the eyebrow. As I connected to this, it made me feel, and put the effect it had on your body, breath, or mood. On the side of the eye. I know that avoiding these glimmers is a way my body and brain cope, particularly when things get busy or stressful. And under the eye. It's easy to get swept away in that state. And under the nose, where everything around me reflects back how I'm feeling. Into the chin. I'm human after all. In the collarbone. Life is busy, complex, stressful at times. But there is always space for welcoming in these glimmers too. On the side of the body. I'm choosing to broaden the lens right now. And across the wrist. And offer yourself a deeper breath. And come back to the top of the head. I'm choosing to look up and around to find these flickers of resource on the inner eyebrow. I'm choosing to turn towards these flickers of resource that might be in my body experience right now. The top of the eyebrow. They might be brief moments, people, places, experiences, sensations, the side of the eye. Anything that brings me back into the present and under the eye. Anything that offers a moment of calm, pleasure, nourishment, or connection. And under the nose. I'm choosing to be open to them. Into the chin. And I'm choosing to be open to the effect they have on my body, on my breath, on my mood, and my mind. The collarbone. When I embody these glimmers, I am rewriting neural pathways that will enable me to see more of them in and around me. On the side of the body. When I embody these glimmers, I benefit from them more and more. And across the wrist. When I gather these glimmers, everyone around me benefits too. On top of the head. So here is my reminder. The inner eyebrow. To look up. On top of the eyebrow. To look around. Side of the eye. To look inwards. And under the eye. There is resource here. And under the nose. They can be simple moments into the chin, important moments in the collarbone, and they can support me greatly. In the side of the body, they can support me in feeling calmer, clearer into the wrist, and in integrity with what's most important to me, into the top of the head. They help me see that ease and coexist within challenge, into the inner eyebrow, that light and coexist with the shadow, and the top of the eyebrow. And they remind me that there is always space for ease in my human experience, even if it's just a flicker in the side of the eye. And this makes me more resilient every day. And then begin to slow down that tap and let your hand rest back on the chest. Take a bigger breath in and a longer breath out. And just noticing how you're doing in the aftermath of that practice. What's here, what's present. And then if you are going down onto the floor now, bringing yourself down, getting the blanket under your stomach, and come to lay down, either making a pillow with your hands or turning your head to one side, or getting a pillow actually underneath your forehead. I'll give you a moment to land here. Maybe have a wiggle, a sway in the hips, letting the tops of the feet rest. If you find it hard for the tops of the feet to rest on the floor, getting a little blanket and putting that underneath the tops of the feet too, so they're not hanging out in space. Now, as you start to settle in and begin to draw your breath down into your belly, that which is pressing up against the blanket. So for these next few rounds of breath, it might feel a little sticky. It might feel a little restricted. We're coming back to that in through the nose here, sending that breath right down into your belly, up against the cushion of the blanket. And as you breathe out, the exhale right to the end, like this beautiful golden thread. And then when you get to the end of that exhale, let that inhale rush in without a pause, right to the top. And exhale right to the end. And begin to find a rhythm here, find some familiarity in this new place that we're in, this new shape we're in, this new practice that we're in. Start to feel that rich rising of the inhale. Sense the back of the body rising with the inhale. And that landing, that softening, that resting that comes all the way down to the end of your exhale. And then it comes back in. And this sense that we can rise and we can return. We can rise and we can return. And for a moment, perhaps just silently repeating that to yourself. I can rise and I can return back. I can respond and then recover. I can react and then I can come home. And so just taking a few moments to stay with this longer exhale, this deep belly inhale, just following that rising and that returning. And how every time you return, how you land in the body a little deeper, maybe a little heavier, a little comfier. It's so important in these practices and in life to begin to remember that yes, we will get into these activated states. Yes, we will have to fight. Yes, we will have to flee sometimes. Yes, we'll have to freeze sometimes, but we can come back. And these practices, even by following the breath, in one round of breath, it reminds us that we can move into these states of activation and we always return. We always return. You always have the capacity to come back home. We just need to remember. We just need to set the conditions of safety, familiarity, and consistency to say, it's safe to come back here now. There's no more lion to run from right now. I know now that it's safe for me to pause, to rest, to recoup, so that the next time I need to rise, to challenge, I need to respond, I know that I have the reserves in the tank to do so, and then I can come back time and time again. I'm just going to give you another minute or so just to stay with that deeper belly breath, pressing against the blanket, finding that rising and then that earthing, that lifting and then landing with the breath. In one round of breath, we move through our nervous system states to an extent. Our inhale is connected to our fight and flight response. And so it gets activated as we breathe in. This is why inhales are more energizing, more lifting. And our exhale is connected to our rest and digest. And so right now, especially as I was closing the session, I wanted to really drop us into that rest and digest a little more, which is why we're extending that exhale. But in every round of breath, we're moving between these states. And it's a beautiful reminder that you can rise, you can respond, and then you can come back. And now when you're ready, just really gently let your attention move away from the breath. Let it come back into a comfortable, natural pace. Begin to gather your hands on either side of your chest and keeping your head really floppy, slowly pressing back to sit back on the knees. And of course, if that doesn't feel good for your knees, just coming to sit back for a moment and notice how you're doing, how you're feeling here. Notice what's in the aftermath of those two practices. And just like we did yesterday, taking a moment here, whether it's with eyes open or closed, just to notice and draw out what are your main takeaways from today. What's the next step you want to take? Now you know what you know. What's the intention behind that next small but mighty step you're going to take? And so this is where we land for today. This is where we close. I am so deeply grateful for you joining me on this course. I really hope that you have found some support, some insight, some stuff that you can start implementing straight away. And of course, if you want to keep diving into this work, the Resourced and Resilient Woman program starts on the 26th of February. And the early bird and all those bonuses that I mentioned for you guys are running until the 2nd. So if you are looking to potentially move into this work, but you're feeling unsure, if you're not sure if it's for you, speak to me. We can jump on a call, or I can be back and forth on emails, whatever feels right and good for you to connect in that way. This is a really powerful program where you have me at every step. You get to really deepen the themes that we explored over the last 2 days and more. You'll get one-to-one guidance support from me every step of the way, as well as a small community of big-hearted women who are sharing this journey with you. You will build your own unique toolkit, support your unique life and needs. And you'll get to interact and experience both through the body, but also experience practicing with heart sensor technology so you can see shifts happening in your nervous system in real time. And you'll learn to translate your experience, your body's cues, learn to really attune to your nervous system and let that support you in thriving in all areas of your life. So if you're feeling called to explore this really integrative approach, somatic healing therapy, yoga therapy, embodied coaching, shadow work, EFT, breath work, to name a few, this is a really beautiful place, a beautiful next step to take. Now, however you choose your next step to be, I'm so deeply grateful that you've joined me for these sessions. Know that I'm here should you have any questions, you want a soundboard, any insights that have come through from these last 2 days. Know that I'm so here for those conversations and so here to support you. And I'm really excited about keeping this conversation going. I'm wishing you well, so well. And thank you so much for joining me for these sessions. Take care, take sweet care of yourself. And I look forward to sharing another space with you real soon. Thank you, guys.